everyone, and welcome to my video honoring the victims of RMS Titanic. So you might be wondering, well, this is a railroad channel. It says right in the name, White Oak Rail Productions. Well, why is he doing a video on Titanic? And the reason is quite simple. I am fascinated by Titanic. I have been for the better part of the last 15 years or so. After I checked out a book at the Ansted, West Virginia Public Library several years ago, and basically I've been hooked ever since. So the basis of this is to bring the story of Titanic to, not necessarily to light, but just to present it. And if you don't know it or don't know some things, maybe you'll learn a few things. If not, hopefully you find this at least somewhat entertaining. Just so we can get this out of the way. To have a train connection to this. Some passengers arrived from London on board trains, so there's your train connection. We can put this on a rail channel now. So, ask anyone who knows me, and you ask them about Titanic and me, and you'll find I can go on a 4-hour-long tangent. Well, obviously no one wants to sit there and watch a 4-hour-long tangent. As much as it would help my watch time, no one wants to do it. So I found a way to get me to just go through the video or go through the story and try to stay on topic. Last year, around the time Titanic, the anniversary of the sinking last April, I started writing a song about Titanic. I didn't finish until September, which is kind of ironic considering she was found on September 1st, 1985. But I didn't finish until then, but I've kept that song in my back pocket. My band that I'm in is on their way to recording it. But I wanted to read the lyrics of the song as basically a poem, because it's basically what it is. And take bits and pieces of that, break the story down piece by piece, and talk about that. And use that as my guide to get me through this story without going on a 4-hour-long tangent. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. Let's start with Titanic's background, because you can't have a ship if you don't have a background. Let's talk about when she was being built. She was built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, which is now Northern Ireland. It was just Ireland at the time. They hadn't had the revolution in Ireland. She was built with the White Star Line, which had its headquarters in Liverpool, England. If you look at pictures of Titanic's stern, the back of the ship, you will see Liverpool painted on her stern. That is because she was registered to Liverpool. She never sailed there. The plan, so I have found out in researching, was to have her steam into Liverpool before she got to Southampton, and therefore left for New York. But her sea trials took a little bit longer than they anticipated, so they had to abandon those plans. So she never did see the port she was registered to. She was laid down on March 31st, 1909, and she was completed and handed over to the White Star Line on April 2nd, 1912 for her maiden voyage. She arrived in Southampton on the 4th of April, 1912, and she was made ready for her maiden voyage by having coal put into her bunkers from other ships that were laid up due to a coal miners' strike that had just ended a few days before. And she was cleaned, and she was painted, and she was just overall prepared for her maiden voyage. Now, I talked about the coal miners' strike just now, and that to me represents one of the most interesting and, quite frankly, tragic parts of the Titanic story. Is that many of the passengers who were on board Titanic should never have been there to begin with. Titanic was very much underbooked. She just didn't have enough people booking trips on her. So the White Star Line was owned by the International Mercantile Marine Company, which had several lines under its ownership. And so other lines that had ships laid up in Southampton donated their coal to Titanic that she could make her voyage. And in return, they also gave her their passengers who were booked on board Titanic. So, under the IMM management, International Mercantile Marine Company, White Star Line had the goal of having a weekly departure from Southampton. On a Wednesday, they left at noon. Titanic was no different. She was supposed to be the weekly departure from Southampton, noontime, April 10th, 1912. And she was to do that. But there is a catch. There's always a catch with Titanic. And I'll get to that after I read the first few lines of my song. We set out from Southampton dock 12:30 April 10, leaving our old lives far behind, never to see again. The promise of a life anew in the land of free is what's drawn us here on this ship to cross this vast sea. That day we sailed from France and off that night to Ireland. Then it was to open sea off to our new land. Now it really is hitting me I'm never to see Europe again. Now I just said Titanic was due to leave at noon. But why did I just get done saying half noon? Well, it wasn't a typo on my notes here, and it wasn't me misspeaking now. That's because Titanic almost had an incident before she even left dock. Before she even left Southampton Harbor. I talked about those laid up ships. Well, one of them, the SS New York, had broke free from her moorings with the displacement of Titanic's propeller starting. They even said it sounded like gunshots when the mooring snapped. Due to quick thinking by Captain Smith and the crew of Titanic and tugboats in the harbor, they avoided a collision with just feet to spare. So after that, they delayed the departure by a half hour to make sure everything was okay, and then they set off for Cherbourg, France. She arrived in Cherbourg that evening and was met by two tenders, the Traffic and the Nomadic. Which tenders are ships that, instead of having a big ship like Titanic go into the harbor and have to turn around and go back out, Titanic can round the entrance to the harbor, drop anchor, and then have ships go to her. It's much simpler, it's much faster, it's much more efficient. So that's what they did. They had the Nomadic and the Traffic come out and bring aboard passengers and mail and different things and baggage. Of course, you gotta have baggage for a 5-day journey across the Atlantic, right? So, two of the more famous passengers aboard Titanic actually boarded in in Cherbourg. Molly Brown and John Jacob Astor boarded in Cherbourg. After that, Titanic weighed anchor and she set off for Queenstown, Ireland overnight. She got to Queenstown the following morning, and she had two tenders come out and get her to come out there then. Again, for the same reason, turnaround time. And they were the America and the Ireland, who brought out passengers and baggage again and whatnot. A handful of people disembarked Titanic and Ireland, but it wasn't that many. Most people wanted to get people on board the ship. After this, Titanic weighed anchor and set out for the open sea. She would never see land again. For many, mostly in third class, who were from Ireland, although third class also had other nationalities in that too, but a lot of people think of third class as being Irish. The departure from Queenstown was bittersweet. They were off to start a new life in America, and they may never see their homeland again. I can't even begin to imagine that. I really can't. There's this hope of starting a new life in America, and then all of a sudden you get that realization that you may never, and probably never, if we're being honest, see your homeland again. It's something. Many gathered on the stern to watch Ireland fade to the distance and take what was likely the last look at their homeland. The song goes on to say, "We sailed on both day and night, full ahead she ran. They said that she was doing better than was planned. We may even arrive before we're scheduled to make land. For days it seemed as if nothing could go wrong. We were sailing and enjoying the band's delightful song." The voyage was actually going pretty well up until that fateful night. Titanic was doing her design top speed of 21 knots without having all 29 of her boilers lit, which was really impressive. As she continued to have boilers lit, it seemed a reason that she could actually get to New York a day early, which would have been great considering White Star Line really wasn't aiming to have Olympic-class vessels be speed records. I mean, they wanted it, don't get me wrong, but they had always said, well, okay, we're going to build bigger, we're going to build, particularly the Olympic class, we're going to build bigger, we're going to build more luxurious, and if we can win the blue ribbon, so be it. So they were on pace to arrive in New York a day early, at least rumors were. Now let me clarify something. When I say arrive in New York a day early, I don't mean docking in New York. Voyages are measured from the lightship of your departure to the lightship of your arrival. A lightship is just a lighthouse on a ship at the entrance or exit to a harbor. Once you leave past the lightship of your departure, your voyage officially counts. And once you get to a lightship of your arrival, you can either drop anchor if you're early and they don't have a spot for you in the harbor, or you can just go on into your scheduled berth. That's when the voyage actually counts. So if Titanic were to reach the lightship in New York Harbor beforehand, she would drop anchor and just wait there until her scheduled berth opened up. Bear in mind, New York Harbor was a pretty busy place in 1912, so they may or may not have had room for Titanic. So moving on. When I mentioned the band, most people have this image of the band playing on, right, as the ship goes down. Everyone loves this, I don't want to say everyone loves to romanticize it, but I think everyone kind of has that, oh, the band played on kind of thing. But I didn't know this until I started looking up, researching for this video, and I love learning about Titanic. She actually had two bands made up of 8 musicians. She had a quintet of Wallace Hartley, John Clark, Percy Taylor, George Crins, and Theodore Brayley. And they play mostly in these first and second class reception halls, usually at lunch or dinner, somewhere in that area. While trio John Hume, Roger Brykoff, and John Woodward were found mostly outside the ship's a la carte restaurant in first class. The band did play on that night as she did sing, but they also were found other places as well. A little bit of an interesting fact, at least it is to me. Song goes on to say, then came that day we all now keep in our minds and hearts, not knowing how our lives would change in the North Atlantic dark. I retired early to my bed, a full day was ahead. As I lay asleep in my cabin, I felt a gentle shake, not knowing at that time how much it would change our fate. April 14, 1912 was a Sunday, and thus there were Christian services all throughout the ship. You had Catholic services in third class. You had Protestant services in all 3 classes of the ship. There also in this, when I first heard about this absolutely floored me. There was a lifeboat drill scheduled for April 14th, 1912, but they didn't hold it. It was canceled. Now, looking back and knowing what we know, it looks kind of bad, but there actually are a few good reasons as to why they canceled the drill. Number one, you would have had to interrupt the church services, and they didn't really want to do that. Another reason is because the ship was doing really well. They're breaking the engines in. It's a brand new vessel. You don't really want to stop the ship, turn the engines off effectively, and then start it back up. You'd rather just continue going, break the engines in lightly, and then go on about your business. So they canceled the lifeboat drill. And like I said, it looks kind of bad, but when you think about it, it makes perfect sense as to why they canceled it. As far as the passengers were concerned, there really wasn't a whole lot going on that day. It was a Sunday. Everyone was enjoying it for the most part, and it just, as it is. For the crew, there was a bit of a mishap. Not so much a mishap, but just kind of an interesting thing happened. The Marconi machine broke the night of April 13th. So, wireless operator Jack Phillips and his assistant Harold Bride spent that night trying to fix it, and they did. But with that came the fact that they were within range of Cape Race, Newfoundland. So there's a massive pile of personal messages to be sent out to Cape Race that have been stacking up while the machine has been down. Jack Phillips stayed up all night didn't get hardly any sleep that night, to repair the machine, and then have this massive backlog. All the while, Titanic is getting reports of ice from other ships. One of those ships was the Californian, which was about 20 miles or so from Titanic when she sank. So, Californian loudly interrupts Titanic, saying, "We are stopped in ice, beware," essentially is what it says. Well, Phillips told the Californian to shut up, because he's got all these messages sitting there. He doesn't really, he's like, yeah, okay, fine, there's ice. I've gotten 15 more notifications of ice today. We get it, okay? And bear in mind, the conditions were clear. Yeah, okay, there might be ice, but if there is, we should see it in time. We know they didn't, but they were supposed to. So, one of the biggest things of irony that I think about when I consider the wireless system, the Marconi machine, is that about 25 minutes after the Californian's wireless operator Cyril Evans retired for the night, Titanic sent out her first distress call. That's a whole heap and helping of irony, if you ask me. So, another thing is that when we think about Titanic striking the iceberg, we think of this violence, shaking, like, oh my gosh, I can't even, what the heck is happening? What is going on? That wasn't necessarily the case. In fact, a lot of people slept right through the collision, didn't even realize anything had happened. So, no one had any clue that in just a few short hours they'd either be dead, or they would be fighting for their lives in the North Atlantic. The song goes on to say, as the water began to creep in, I began to realize just how bad it was and that we were fighting for our lives. We tried our best to race the deck and finally arrived as they were dropping the lifeboats into the frigid night. We finally found a lifeboat that would save us from the sea. All it meant was that we had to split up our family. My husband was not allowed to go, just women and children. I'll never forget the children as we said goodbye to him. They were losing their father and I was losing my best friend. As people began to realize what was happening, they obviously wanted to get to deck, right? They wanted to get to lifeboats. Captain Smith gave the order to uncover the lifeboats at about 12:05, roughly 25 minutes or so after Titanic struck the iceberg. This is before they knew the ship was doomed. Estimates say that around 12:30 in the morning, thereabouts, is when they confirmed Titanic will sink. But they wanted to have the lifeboats uncovered just in case they needed them, which is pretty safe. And it's pretty smart, honestly. Now, we all know the phrase women and children first, right? We've heard it a million times. But it depended on what side of the ship you were on, whether or not that actually applied and how it was taken. So, First Officer William Murdoch was in command of the lifeboats on the starboard side, while Second Officer Charles Lightoller was in charge of the lifeboats on the port side. Lightoller took it to being more literal, meaning women and children only. You cannot have a man on this lifeboat. Murdoch on the starboard side, once women and children had gotten into his boat, would let men on. So while that phrase had been around for a while and was standard procedure to order it when you ordered the lifeboats to be uncovered, it was down to interpretation. If only there had been a difference in interpretation, we may have had more people being saved. But that's an estimate. We don't know. I mean, there were definitely spaces left on lifeboats. Lifeboats were being lowered half full. But who's to say if you'd let the men on it, some people would have gotten on? There's no way of knowing. Let me also point this out as well. There were not enough lifeboats for every person on board that ship, but consider what lifeboats were designed to do at that time. They were designed not to hold people in the frigid North Atlantic for 4 hours waiting for help to come, They were designed to ferry from a stricken ship to a rescue ship and then be used multiple times. They weren't designed to be holding people out there while they freeze to death, basically. So, in terms of what they had in mind for Titanic to do in an instance she was foundering, which she was, it was perfectly fine. She was setting sail with as many lifeboats as really it was fine what she had. Song goes on. As the boat began to sail to sea, I only thought one thing. When will our rescue come and stop us from freezing? Sometime later I looked back to see where we had been, to see if my husband was allowed to save his skin. Suddenly I heard her moan. She could go on no more. She broke in two and then she sank to the ocean floor. There was some good folks still on board, the captain and the crew. Now all of them will call the North Atlantic their home and the Titanic their tomb. This is a part where I really just stop presenting the facts and start thinking about the human impact. And I don't mean life and death, although that is certainly a part of this. I think about the incredible change that took place on board Titanic. You're going from a voyage that is going really, really well. Everything seems to be going fine after that near miss with the New York in Southampton. 1 minute you're cruising along almost to New York. You might arrive in the day early, and the next minute the ship is sinking. That's absolutely insane. And then you get onto a lifeboat and you watch the ship that you have been calling home the last few days, and you prepare to travel on. I was sailing on Titanic when she made her triumphant voyage, her maiden voyage. It was a fantastic trip. You should definitely take it. I recommend when she goes back to Southampton, or if you're coming back from England, take Titanic. And then you watch her break in two and slip below the waves. With possibly even with people you know still aboard the ship. Just think about that for a second. Just think about that. You might be looking at losing the love of your life as she slips beneath the waves. You might be looking at losing someone who was going to be the father of your child. Your parents might be on board that ship. Just think about that for a second. That's what really gets me about Titanic. And look, I love learning about the history of this ship. I absolutely do. And it's incredibly fascinating to learn different things about the ship. But the human element is what really gets me about Titanic. Thinking about the people who were there and the stories they have helps me to make this a human tragedy, a human thing. It brings the human element into it. It's not just something you see about on TV or in a movie, as much as I love TV shows and movies about Titanic. The song goes on to say in the last line, all these years have gone by and the children there are grown, never having a father they could call their own. Sometimes we still think about that journey to this day, all of those that lost their lives and those who made it safe. We carry them with us to the day we die, then we join them on the Titanic in the sky. I'm not trying to copy the James Cameron ending to the movie. I'm not doing that at all. But it fits perfectly with what this is all about. It fits absolutely perfectly. The people who survived are still linked to those who died that night. The last survivor to pass away was Melvina Dean, who passed away in May 2009, a little under 3 years till the 100th anniversary of Titanic's sinking. She was barely 2 months old when she boarded Titanic. She had no memory of it. But we live in a world where no one on board that ship is left to tell the tale. And it's up to us to carry on their stories for future generations. This is part of the reason why I made this video. To honor the 1,496 people who lost their lives that night and went down with the ship. And the stories of the 712 who aren't here to tell them anymore. This piece of coal is one of the artifacts brought up for the wreck. In fact, coal is actually the only artifact the general public can purchase. but the coal can't talk. It's not speaking and saying, oh, in coal bunker number 3, let me tell you about it. It's not going to tell you that. It stands for something. It's up for you to talk for it. It's up for you to talk to the artifacts you see in museums. It's up for you to talk to the graves that are in Halifax. It's up to you to talk and keep those stories alive. In the description of this video, I will post some of my favorite places to learn about Titanic, whether they be websites or other YouTube channels. I want to provide the information as well as my sources for this video as well. I don't believe in plagiarizing, so I will post my sources, and yeah, so it's up to us. Titanic struck ice at 11:40 p.m. ship's time, and on April 14th, it slipped beneath the waves at 2:20 a.m. ship's time. That's 2 hours 40 minutes, and within that time, there are numerous stories that are there to explore. Some of them I'm sure we don't even know yet, and that's what makes Titanic so interesting. I've called it the ship that never dies, the ship that won't die, because every time I think we got it figured out, or every time we're thinking, oh, there's no more stories to hear about, she always finds a way to become relevant in modern society again. She always finds a way. I encourage you to look up Titanic sometime. You might not be as fascinated as what I and some people are, but then again, you just might. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, and if you want, you can hit that bell and let me notify when I release a new video. Until next time, this is Lucas Berry, and I'll see you next time when we go back to trains, hopefully. I'll try to get back out and railfan a little bit more once the stay-at-home order for the state of West Virginia is lifted post-virus. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please do stay tuned to this channel. We've got some exciting things coming up. Take care, everyone.